Hi everyone, we're going to get started. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to our webinar, 10 Hiring Manager Roadblocks and How to Overcome Them. Just to get started with a couple webinar tips and tricks, make sure that you are muted. You will be muted throughout this session, so go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A pane. If you want to go to the next slide. All lines will be muted just to make sure we don't have any of that background noise. But we want to keep today as interactive as possible. So feel free to go on Twitter. You can hashtag Glassdoor, and we will take as many questions as we can at the very end. All right, now I would like to introduce our featured speakers today. We're really excited about this. We haven't quite done a webinar exactly like this before, so it's great to have Ariana Moon from Greenhouse, and as well as Ravi Edwards, a hiring manager at Glassdoor. It's kind of a cool mashup of speakers today, as we have Ariana on the recruiting side of things and Ravi from the hiring manager standpoint. Now I would like to go ahead and pass things on over to Ariana, and she will walk through the agenda and get started.
Great, Shay. Thank you for that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm going to start off by kicking off this deck with today's agenda. So here are kind of some bullet points that we'll be going over today. We'll start off by defining the roles of a recruiter and a hiring manager. Then we'll go into defining the problem, and then identifying common behaviors on both sides, then how to address these common behaviors, and then we'll dive right into our 10 hiring manager roadblocks and solutions, and then kind of segue into a Q&A. So to start off, let's go ahead and define the roles. Ravi, I'm going to let you start off by kind of going over what we do from a hiring manager standpoint.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ariana, and thank you, Shay. Hopefully everyone can hear me loud and clear. So my name is Ravi Edwards, as Shay kindly mentioned a couple slides ago. I'm a hiring manager here at Glassdoor. I'm a manager of a sales team across 2 European locations. I have about 8 people on my team right now. So just to kind of outline the hiring manager, right? You know, as a hiring manager, I'd like to think that I understand the business needs for a new hire. The hiring manager tends to define what goals a successful hire should actually accomplish within the organization. And the hiring manager actually knows the skills that are needed to accomplish such goals. And obviously the hiring manager can get buy-in from interviewers on their team as well. And ultimately, me as the hiring manager, I make the decisions for whether or not we should hire a candidate. So I'll hand things back over to Ariana to kind of define the role of a recruiter.
Awesome. Thanks, Ravi. All right. So on the recruiting end, what do we kind of bring to the table? So we're someone that ideally has a pulse on the talent market. So usually recruiters are the ones reaching out to candidates, posting on job boards, measuring the ROI of the job boards, and initially shifting through resumes, et cetera, et cetera. We also usually speak with the most candidates. So usually we'll be the one to conduct the most initial screens in any sort of interview process. And lastly, and I think most importantly, the recruiter is the person that has the most insight into the recruiting process at any given moment. And what I kind of mean by that is, you know, the recruiter is usually the one keeping track of candidates moving through the interview processes. So we know how candidates are, for example, prioritizing us among other companies they might be interviewing with. We understand, you know, why they might potentially drop out of our process or kind of what they have at stake. We measure things like response rates when it comes to proactively reaching out to passive candidates, which we like to call sourcing. So we have a lot of kind of knowledge, and it's our job to bring that to the hiring manager. So let's move on ahead and define the problem. Here we go. So recruiting is very much a two-way street, but the problem that we tend to encounter a lot is insufficient communication, mistrust, and misalignment on a job search between a recruiter and a hiring manager. So next, we're going to move on to how these problems might manifest themselves through a given interview process. So let's go ahead and identify some common behaviors. So here are some things that a recruiter might be feeling. I know that for certain. I've felt this in the past, so some of this might resonate with any of you guys listening. So as a recruiter, you might feel my hiring manager doesn't prioritize recruiting. My hiring manager doesn't provide feedback on candidates, doesn't interview effectively, gives me impossible profiles to find, I don't know where to start, and lastly kind of blames me when their team spends too much time interviewing and misses deadlines. So there's this overall sentiment of my hiring manager kind of expects me to do all the work. So moving on to the other side of things, so here are some things that our hiring managers might be feeling. So my recruiter doesn't update me on the recruiting process, my recruiter expects me and my team to do too many interviews, doesn't find me the right people, takes way too long to find quality candidates, and a comment that I've kind of definitely come across is, is recruiting actually really that hard? So I think it's pretty clear from these sentiments outlined that there can be a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding, or mistrust. And our goal through this presentation is kind of to give you action steps to kind of overcome those things. So let's outline the goal. All right, so the way that we create alignment between recruiters and hiring managers at Greenhouse is to become what we call strategic partners to our hiring managers. So we as recruiters are the ones who drive the process, who know the talent market, and obviously speak with the most candidates. So as a strategic partner, it's our job to manage the speed and the effectiveness of our recruiting process, as well as uphold the quality of hire by providing an informed framework for a hiring manager's decision-making process. So that was a lot of words. So what would this mean in more actionable terms? So I'm going to highlight a few key principles that we like to think about here at Greenhouse to hopefully outline what it means to be a strategic partner in a way that you can kind of apply that to the day-to-day. So first principle, communicate. So it's our job as a recruiter to very much proactively provide information. So have regular meetings with your hiring manager, kind of book them, schedule them, put it on their calendar, and solve bottlenecks together. You're really a partner there together with them, so they should feel very invested and involved in the recruiting process. Secondly, participate. So involve yourself with the team that you're hiring for. So if they have maybe, let's say, weekly meetings with their manager, it's probably a great idea if you sit in on those weekly meetings so you understand kind of what they're working on, their pain points, all those things. And train your interviewers. Make sure they're set up for success when it comes to meeting the candidates that you've actually sourced for them. And lastly, be transparent. So this is one of our favorite things at Greenhouse. We try to be as transparent as possible, both to hiring managers and to candidates, and share expectations and make sure we hold each other accountable. So if you're going to miss a deadline, be honest about that, and then from there, create an action plan about how you're going to hit your next goal. All right, so from here, we're going to dive right into how to overcome 10 very common hiring manager roadblocks. Before I get started with these 10 roadblocks, I just want to share with you a little bit about how we've structured them. So these 10 roadblocks will fall into these 4 categories, starting off with job profile, then moving on to prioritization, then alignment, and then finally finishing up with communication. Okay. So let's jump right in here. Roadblock number 1, hiring managers don't know what they are looking for. I'm sure a lot of you have found yourself, in this kind of boat. So some of the comments or sentiments that you might hear is, we only hire the best people, or I want to hire a VP of sales but can only afford to pay this person $100K, which might not be the right kind of job profile and compensation in line with the market. Or I need a senior MySQL engineer who can code MySQL, Java, and also know JavaScript. That person might not even exist in the market that you're in. So here are some solutions to address those sentiments. So what we like to do at Greenhouse, anytime we open up a new job, is we lead with what we call a kickoff meeting. So a kickoff meeting is a scheduled and structured time for both the recruiter and the hiring manager to outline the profile of the ideal candidate that they would want to hire and what we would want this person to accomplish. Next, you should move on to discussing the business need for the role. So it's very important to understand this, especially as you're talking to candidates and potentially selling them on the opportunity. You need to be able to speak to kind of what's the problem this person will fix. Why is this person even needed? What will this person do that, for example, no one is currently doing? And thirdly, define what best actually means. So a lot of hiring managers like to say, you know, I want the best candidates, we only hire the best people, but what to them is the definition of best? So that kind of leads directly into the next bullet point, which is describing the scorecard of an ideal candidate, not a person. So scorecard is a little bit of greenhouse jargon. So a scorecard is a list of knowledge, skills, and abilities that someone needs to do the job. And it's something that we use to help us build a structured interview process so that, you know, throughout the interview process, we're directly assessing for those lists of knowledge, skills, and abilities that we've defined. And moving onwards, don't be afraid to ask why. So let's say your hiring manager says that their ideal candidate has to have a computer science degree from an Ivy League school. You know, it might be worth asking them, is this really necessary? Perhaps if, you know, you were looking for a junior attorney to join your team, this person might need a JD. That makes a little bit more sense, but don't be afraid to ask why on the points you might not think are completely necessary. And then lastly, reevaluate often. So the recruiting process is very much a living, breathing thing. So it's something that you're going to be tweaking as you move along and move candidates through your process to make it as ideal as possible. All right, moving on to roadblock number 2. So still under kind of the job profile category. So often hiring managers might want a purple squirrel. That's kind of jargon for a candidate that is completely ideal but may not exist. So here are some comments that you might hear. I need the best candidates in the door. Why do I need to ask my team for referrals? Isn't that your job? And this one's a little bit extreme, but this is something I've definitely heard before. If I wasn't supposed to hire people, you wouldn't. If I was supposed to hire people, you wouldn't be here. So let's talk about some solutions. Okay, so one of the things that I really like to do is schedule time to source together. So sourcing being reaching out to passive candidates that you think might be a good fit for your job. So one of the reasons I think this is really important is because if hiring managers are sitting down with you, kind of going through LinkedIn with you and writing Boolean searches with you, they might see for themselves that they can't find their definition of someone who's perfect, and they might be willing to be a little bit more lenient on some criteria they initially established as a must-have. Moving along, so review top performers. Discussing the top performers on the hiring manager's team is something that might give you a little bit more insight into why they want this purple squirrel. You know, where the top performers on the team candidates with basic core skills combined with certain intangibles like maybe a willingness to learn or a hunger for advancement. This will kind of help you determine whether certain technical skills are non-negotiable or there's something that can be learned on the job. And one of the biggest takeaways that I've had throughout my experience helping hiring managers recruit is usually the right attitude in a candidate is hard to come by, so that's something that, you know, we want to assess for. And moving on, start interviewing. So sometimes the best thing to do is to have your hiring manager speak with a few candidates, even if they're not perfect on paper. Maybe they can become intrigued enough to want to pursue them, or at least lower their expectations or criteria. So, you know, rather than being kind of paralyzed by the search and providing no one because you don't think anyone is perfect, it's worth educating your hiring manager and perhaps through that process winning yourself some new flexibility in the search. And moving on, get to the bottom of why they need this purple squirrel. So, you know, is it because something happened on their team amongst their current employees that they, you know, want to prevent from the future? Is it kind of going back to maybe their manager telling your hiring manager they need certain things? It's always good to have an in-depth discussion of, you know, why do you need this person and why do you feel like they need all these qualifications? And lastly, stack rank skills. So this is something that I really like doing with my hiring managers, especially if they give me a long list of qualifications and technical skills needed and soft skills desired. I'll go to them and ask them, well, what are your top 3 qualifications? What are the top 3 technical skills you want this person to have? So that gives you a little bit more flexibility when you're actively searching for candidates. Okay. Roadblock number 3, now moving into the prioritization category. hiring managers don't prioritize hiring. So common behaviors might include not reviewing resumes, even forgetting scheduled interviews, or failing to review a job description to help you out and in terms of making sure the role is articulated properly. So here are some common sentiments. I need to cancel my interviews this week in order to meet a deadline. I'm sure a lot of us have heard that before. Why can't you write the job description? Isn't that part of your job? Or, I'll review those resumes next week. So let's talk about some solutions again. All right, so the first one here is tough love. Hold your hiring manager accountable. So define what holding hiring managers accountable means for you, and if they don't take responsibility for their part, don't open the role or stop sending over candidates. That's usually a very good way to kind of get their attention and make them reinvest their efforts into the search. Be a squeaky wheel. So hiring managers have a lot on their plate, especially those who are also people managers and growing a team. So you need that's proactive in terms of keeping the process moving. One example that I'll share is I had a VP that I was working with here at Greenhouse, and there was a lot going on for the VP in that particular quarter. So what I did when I wasn't getting responses to my emails is I actually went into his office one morning and sat in his chair before he arrived. And so when he walked through the door, we had a really great conversation and got to catch up on how the role was going that I was helping him out with. So be proactive in what way works for you. Okay, also set a regular communication cadence. So you'd be surprised what 15 minutes per week can do when it comes to you syncing up with your hiring manager. This is also an opportunity for you to provide your hiring manager with more visibility into how the process is going. And usually it's the case that the more they understand how many candidates are doing well and moving through, the more excited and invested they might get. Okay, next is be data-driven. So this is something that we're very fond of here at Greenhouse. So provide information and show how important hiring is. If we're losing candidates because the process is taking too long, track this data. Show your hiring manager. For example, if you're reaching out to candidates proactively, track how many you've reached out to, how many responded to you, how many actually were interested in chatting about the role, and provide that data back to your hiring manager. Usually, it's easier to communicate what you them if they understand, why you're asking from them based on hard numbers. And then finally, always be prepared. So, hiring managers will often be curious about the candidates moving through a process at any given time. And if you kind of create this track record of being very on top of who's doing what and how this candidate is doing and how that candidate is performing, they'll be much more likely to go to you for information. All right, here we go. Roadblock number 4, still under the prioritization category. Hiring managers don't know how to budget time for recruiting. Here are some sentiments. We're going to miss our sprint goals this month if we take this much time to interview. So this might be something you hear from your engineering team. Or, my engineers are complaining that they need to stay late to finish their feedback forms. Also not an ideal sentiment for your hiring manager and team to feel. So let's talk about some solutions again. Okay. So you can start off by automating the interview process. The interview process is, like I said, a living, breathing thing. But often, if you can find an opportunity to automate some part of the interview process to make things easier for you and your interviewers, that's awesome. So talk about testing tools, maybe like HackerRank or tools like interview.io that helps interviewers compare people apples to apples and makes the testing process easy and almost fun for everyone. And then train the recruiter to assess technical skills, at least on a high level. So, me as a recruiter, I'm not an engineer, but one of the ways that I help our VP of engineering kind of source for engineers is I have very basic, very high-level technical questions that I can ask when screening engineers so that I can kind of knock out those that don't have the same understanding that we do about certain tools and technologies or same concepts or alignment so that I don't have to potentially waste my hiring manager and their team's time when it comes to interviewing a lot of people. And then finally, build interview time into project deadlines. So I think this is something that's very important when it comes to communicating with your hiring manager. So let's say, for example, your interview team interviews an average of 5 candidates per week, and each of those 5 candidates spends about four hours at the office. So you can assume that you lose about 20 hours of development time or kind of customer service time. So if you communicate these kinds of numbers and calculations to your hiring manager, they'll understand better the time investment that their team is putting into interviewing. And this might even encourage them to be more proactive about creating a process that's more efficient and more structured so that their team is not spending so much time into interviewing. Okay. All right, we are halfway through roadblock number 5. Now we're moving on to the alignment category. So hiring managers panic if they don't get a ton of applications immediately. I'm sure we've all been there at some point. There aren't enough people applying to my post. Where are we promoting this job? I need this to be front and center. What's wrong with the post? I think you need to change the description. So how do we address those? So let's start off by assessing advertising channels. So what are the niche job boards that you can post on? Are there perhaps specific places where, for example, a security engineer would look for a job as opposed to a full stack developer? We recently on the Greenhouse side decided that we're open to having a remote employee for one of our engineering positions. So what I went ahead and did is research some remote job boards that seem to have some high quality posting from well-known brands and decided to try those out. Next, assess your job title. So you always want to maximize SEO, search engine optimization. So, you want to make sure that you have a title that people are familiar with, that people will be attracted to and click on, especially the right people that you're looking for. So an example of this is we recently opened up a senior site reliability engineer role, and we decided to A/B test titles. So we were testing senior DevOps engineer in a conjunction with senior site reliability engineer, and we actually found out that DevOps tends to be a much more frequently used and well-known term. So, there was that risk of if we stuck with the old title, we would miss out on a lot of great candidates that didn't resonate with that job title. And then moving on to assessing the competition. So it's always a good exercise to see how other companies are defining the role that you've opened. So for example, are you using the latest vernacular when you're talking about the responsibilities of the job to get people excited? Because what was normal yesterday could very well be kind of old news today. I'm sure we're very all familiar with that. And at the same time, you want to make sure that your description is written in your company's brand voice. So this is something that's very important. Does it reflect how you like to talk about your roles at your company, or is it kind of bland like every other job description for, let's say, a sales development representative out there? Okay, next is establish timelines for sourcing. So this is something that is very important as well. So my experience, for example, sourcing engineers is, I will always follow up with them for the second or third time. And my experience, I've found that many engineers don't respond until that follow-up message, especially because, they're so sought after, they're getting hundreds of messages all the time. So if you do create a sourcing plan together with your hiring manager, it probably makes sense to give them a heads up that, you're not expecting, for example, 30 or 40% of the people that you reach out to respond until after the third email, so that they're kind of not biting their nails waiting for people to be interested in the role. And then lastly, I think this is one of my favorite points, the best candidates usually have to be wooed because they already have jobs. So, a big part of our philosophy here at Greenhouse is, we want to hire the best people too, but because the best people are usually already employed and very engaged in their jobs, we have to then, in order to live up to that philosophy, proactively source people. Okay. Roadblock number 6, I'm going to pass this on to Ravi to kind of allow him to share this from a hiring manager's perspective.
Thank you, Ariana. Yes, I definitely want to chime in with a few roadblocks that resonate with me the most. Although quite a few of the roadblocks that you mentioned certainly do resonate, and I've been smiling from ear to ear over here from a hiring manager's perspective. So if we're continuing with the alignment category, Roadblock number 6 here is hiring managers rely solely on recruiting to find candidates. As I mentioned, I have definitely been guilty of solely relying on the recruitment team to find the candidates that I need in the past. And some of the excuses or sentiments, should we say, that I've used in the past include, I only want to interview people who are late stage, obviously. Why do I actually need to ask my team for referrals? Isn't that your job? And if I was supposed to hire people, you wouldn't be here. I've never used that one, just disclaimer right there. But some of the solutions that I feel could help to alleviate some of these challenges. Listen, telling your hiring manager what you will and just won't do is actually a really good idea. Let's be honest. Sometimes hiring managers are completely oblivious to a recruiter's remit, and we actually have unreasonable expectations at times, and some of those expectations can actually be alleviated by a simple kickoff meeting, as Ariana mentioned earlier, something they do at Greenhouse, and it's certainly something that we do here at Glassdoor. So a simple kickoff meeting at the start of the process to outline expectations and what the recruiter's remit actually is. Secondly, push back. Recruiting, again, as Ariana mentioned at the start, it's a reciprocal process, which again can and should be outlined in that kickoff meeting, as I just mentioned. If we move on there to the third point, get your hiring managers help with sourcing. And then number 4, get your hiring managers help with referrals as well. I'm incredibly fortunate here at Glassdoor, to work with a really unbelievable and collaborative recruitment team internally. Just a few weeks ago, the recruiter that I work with on this side of the pond, she's actually based in Chicago, Amy, she actually suggested that we put some time on the calendar for employees across both European locations to have a referral competition. It was like a referral sourcing competition. So what we did was we actually set aside an hour at the end of the day where Amy walked us through how we can actually source and refer candidates online. And then she offered up a prize to the person that referred or sourced the most candidates within that hour that we set aside. And again, just to put things into context, my team's incredibly busy, right? I manage a team of sales folks. So, you can imagine, competition and being able to actually have a prize at the end of it was something that incentivized them and make them obviously want to be a little bit more involved and be a bit more collaborative with the recruitment team. And then finally, show your hiring managers some tough love when it's actually necessary. Don't be afraid to push back, as we mentioned at the start. Tough love is absolutely necessary at times to get things done from a recruitment perspective, for sure.
Thanks, Ravi. Definitely love your example there with Amy and her referral competition. That's really cool. Okay, I'm going to take on roadblock number 7, which is still under the alignment category. So hiring managers don't know how to prepare and coach their interview team. Here are some sentiments. I don't know how to evaluate this candidate because I don't know anything about the role. So this might be something that you hear from one of the interviewers that you've selected. Why do I need to provide feedback? We're not hiring the guy anyway. So this might be something that you hear from either your hiring manager or someone who's interviewed a candidate. This is definitely something that's been said to me in the past. And lastly, I think my favorite, wait, I have an interview today? So let's talk about how we can prevent these things from happening. Solutions. So show your hiring manager that ineffective interviews waste their team's time. So we touched upon this a little bit earlier when it comes to kind of measuring time that your team is spending interviewing. I think it's always important to remind your hiring manager that time equals dollars. So if you kind of see it from that sort of perspective, you want to optimize kind of the cost as much as possible. Also, train the interviewers yourself. So at Greenhouse, we host general interview trainings for everyone who wants to be part of the interview process. But in addition to that, we also hold smaller meetings with a specific interview teams for specific jobs to make sure that we're all aligned on the ideal profile we're looking for before we actually start talking to anyone. It's a bad experience for both the interviewer and the candidate to go into an interview without any sort of context or preparation. So that's something we really try to avoid for the best kind of candidate/interviewer experience as possible. Also, remind the interviewers often, like the hiring managers, they are people who have projects on their plate that are not related to recruiting and, might have different priorities on the table. So make sure they have what they need to conduct a successful interview. It might not even hurt reminding them if they have kind of like an early morning interview that's happening the day before. For example, if you have a candidate who's done really well in the process so far, it might not hurt to kind of prep the team on that. So maybe they can focus on selling just as much as interviewing. So those are some ideas there. Schedule roundups. So roundups is the terminology we use for anytime someone has completed our interview process or has come on site and they're kind of in final stages, where we as an interview team, together with the hiring manager and the recruiter, all get into a room and discuss, how the candidate has done, share feedback, kind of talk about what the candidate was really strong at, what they were potentially lacking in. And this is a very important part of the interview process because it's really the only time the entire interview team gets to sync up regarding one person. So it's not only an opportunity to talk about a candidate, but it's also a chance for the recruiter and the hiring manager to make sure that our recruiting process is working as effectively as possible. So an example there can be, let's say someone came on site and did surprisingly poorly across all of their interviews. So it might be worth assessing that, could this person have been weeded out earlier if we had, thought about assessing something more specifically so that, we didn't end up taking up every interviewer's time. And then lastly, value and acknowledge your interviewers' opinions. They are people who decided to dedicate time to interviewing to help the hiring manager and you hire for their team, and that should be acknowledged. So if they do have feedback, even if it's feedback that is conflicting with another person's feedback, like listen to them and make sure that they feel heard and get to the bottom of understanding why they felt that way about a candidate. All right, Ravi, back to you.
Thank you, Ariana. Okay, so moving on to roadblock number 8. So we're entering the communication category now. Yes, this is definitely where I fail epically. Okay, so hiring managers don't provide timely feedback to recruitment. Oh boy. Yes, I definitely am guilty of this. If they were handing out time for this, I'd probably get a life sentence. Okay, so some of the excuses that I tend to use, I don't have time to write feedback, which is actually true. I don't have time to meet up. I don't have time to meet them, just bring the next one in. It's too cumbersome to leave feedback, which is sometimes true. No, listen, if we look at some of the solutions here, make feedback actually really easy to provide. If providing feedback is really easy, interviewers are more likely to provide it, right? Hiring managers are much more likely to give that feedback. At Glassdoor, what we've done, we've instituted a really simple thumbs up or thumbs down or even middle of the road sort of rating system. And then we've added in additional standard 3 questions to actually evaluate each candidate. So if the interviewer wants to add a little bit more context, we always accept that, but it keeps the whole process pretty consistent. And it also allows and gets the recruiter the core information that's necessary to know how to quickly move forward with candidates. If we look at the second point here, I mean, I cannot underscore how important this is, setting up a weekly debrief. I know, Ariana, you've mentioned this already as well. Listen, if hiring managers like myself are completely adverse to leaving feedback in the ATS because maybe your ATS is a little bit too clunky, it's actually a good idea to have a weekly recruiting debrief where you can actually review all the candidates in the mix, those that have been interviewed in the past week or so, the ones that you want to move forward with or the ones that, unfortunately you want to cut loose. This isn't actually ideal because you won't actually have the feedback in your ATS, but the recruiter can always go back and add some notes when they actually close out the candidates or move them forward to the next step. And also the recruiter that I actually work with, again, internally, Amy, I can't speak highly enough of her. She has a weekly standing meeting with us on the calendar. So there are 3 hiring managers in the EMEA region. And prior to the meeting, Amy will send out an agenda and a recap so that we're all very much aware of where we are and what we're actually planning to discuss during that meeting. And as those meetings have actually evolved over time, each hiring manager now, instead of having to jump on for 30 minutes, each hiring manager actually only needs to attend for the 10 minutes that's actually pertinent to their hiring needs. And then the final option there from a solutions perspective, go straight to the top and get the buy-in from hiring manager's manager or the greater leadership team. As a hiring manager, I probably wouldn't recommend this one, but I can say that, I mean, in short, this is a surefire way of lighting a fire and making it a priority for your hiring manager. Okay, so moving on to roadblock number 9, continuing in the communication category, hiring managers become unresponsive. Absolutely. Sometimes I am a bit unresponsive. So these are some of the sentiments that you might hear. I'm super busy and I don't have the time, particularly at this time of year. It's the end of the quarter. My actual job is more important than dealing with this. Isn't this your job? That one's a bit harsh. Or finally, no reply, no reply, no reply, tumbleweeds going across the room. Okay, so let's look at some of the solutions here. Okay, be persistent. Unresponsiveness is, unfortunately, it's a normal part of your world as a recruiter, I'd say. Ariana, by all means, disagree. I think the key here is, why is the hiring manager being unresponsive? Is the position that you're trying to fill, is it no longer a priority? Has it been put on hold, for instance? Are they promoting someone internally? These are, reasonable reasons for the unresponsiveness. There are a number of other reasons behind unresponsiveness, but regardless, you need an actual answer as a recruiter. And in today's competitive recruiting landscape, if you think about it, giving the excuses to your execs that the hiring manager is unresponsive is unfortunately just not acceptable. So you kind of need to get an answer from someone. Which begs the question, how do I actually go ahead and do this? Now, get your hiring manager's attention. That's basically the short answer. Getting their attention can be pretty easy, actually, when you think about it. I mean, there are so many mediums of communication now. We can text, you can email, voicemail, GChat, instant message, WhatsApp message even, or you could always just go and stand by their desk or simply just drop into their office, as Ariana mentioned a little bit earlier. Find a time on their calendar, ultimately, that's open. Drop by, set up a quick 10-minute catch-up session. Does the hiring manager arrive at work early, right? Or do they stay really late? Oftentimes, these are the best times to actually grab some time with them and get to the bottom of what's a priority for you. Use it to your advantage, ultimately. And listen, if you are able to get some time with them, I would say make sure you come prepared. Know exactly what questions that you need answered in order to actually move forward. Be really succinct. By showing them that you actually understand that their time is actually really valuable, you start to go ahead and build rapport. As I mentioned, I manage a team of sales professionals, so you can imagine, again, at this time of the year, it's the end of the quarter, my time is really, really, really valuable, and I can be incredibly unresponsive. And then final solution here, use your allies. If your hiring manager won't respond to you, they may respond to your manager. So why not leverage your manager and get your manager to reach out to that hiring manager if you are getting unresponsiveness. So if we move on now, finally, to the final roadblock, again, continuing with the communication category, I think this speaks volumes about me. Hiring managers don't see the value in weekly update meetings or calls. And when I say it speaks volumes about me, I think communication as a category. I absolutely do see the value in those weekly meetings and calls. And some of the excuses that you might hear include, I can't have a standing meeting to deal with this, or I'm just too busy. Now, if we look at this from a solutions perspective, okay, first things first, can the search be delegated? This is actually something that I'm going through. So first, ask your hiring manager if there's someone on their team who they could potentially delegate this to. Perhaps an emerging leader. It's a two-for solution if you think about it. It would be great from a development perspective for the potential leader, and it will actually likely be something that would be part of their responsibility should they be promoted, and it also gets this off the hiring manager's plate. Let the hiring manager know that you'll work with this individual and then present them with the top 3 candidates. As I said, I'm currently going through this with a couple people on my team, so I think this is a really, really effective solution. Secondly here, you can go ahead and join the hiring manager's weekly team meeting so that they actually don't need to go ahead and get an additional meeting on the calendar. So go ahead and join their meeting and address any recruiting initiatives within the last 5 minutes maybe. You might also be able to get some time with your hiring manager as well as kill two birds with one stone. So you can use this time to actually ask for referrals from the hiring manager's team. Additionally, this actually integrates you with the team, and you can actually go ahead and get a picture of what a successful person in that role would be, right? What does a successful person look like within that role? Being in that team meeting gives you a really good opportunity to actually go ahead and establish that. And then finally, find alternative ways to communicate. Ask if there are other ways to communicate with that hiring manager. As I mentioned earlier, the instant message, Google Docs, GChat, WhatsApp, text, email. What's their preferred method to actually go ahead and communicate? And if you've pinpointed what that is, you could actually go ahead and get a little bit more from your hiring manager in the longer run. And that's it from me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ravi. I definitely love hearing your perspective as a hiring manager. Okay, so let's recap before we move into Q&A. So communicate, participate, and be transparent. So being a strategic partner to your hiring manager, again, means building alignment. It means creating trust. It means communicating often, proactively, and also educating each other because you are kind of partners and you have this relationship that you're trying to build. So in the communicate category, proactively provide information, have regular meetings, kind of how Ravi was just speaking about, and solve the bottlenecks you encounter together. In the participate category, involve yourself with the team that you're hiring for, train your interviewers, get to know them, get to know their pain points, get to know what they would want from an ideal hire. And lastly, be transparent. So share expectations, hold your hiring manager accountable, make sure they hold you accountable as well. And if you're missing a deadline or if your recruiting process is swerving slightly off track and taking a little longer than expected, communicate that. Be transparent so that moving forward, it's easier to create an action plan. So those are the key recruiting principles there as a recap. And now we'll move straight into Q&A.
Perfect. Great. Thanks to both you, Ariana and Ravi. Amazing information. We have actually quite a few questions here. If anybody on the line still has questions, feel free to enter them in the box. We'll get to as many as possible. I've seen a couple come through about sharing the materials from today's presentation. Absolutely. We'll send you a follow-up email containing the recording and all that good stuff. So the first question is for Ariana. Ariana, what would you say is the best way to diffuse any frustration between a recruiter and a hiring manager?
Diffuse frustration between a recruiter and a hiring manager. That's a great question. That's also a very broad question. I think it depends a lot on the context of how this frustration has built up. My go-to when it comes to moving forward and creating an action plan is going back to data as much as possible. So let's say, for example, you had 50 direct applicants and you personally sourced 50 people and 10 of them are interested in getting on the phone with you, and your roadblock was a hiring manager just not following up with you and not being an active participant. I would go to your hiring manager and say, hey, I did a lot of work reaching out to people, and I did a lot of work kind of researching job boards and posting, and here are the numbers of people that I've generated in terms of viable candidates. And the roadblock that I encountered is that you weren't responsive, so these candidates lost interest, and that kind of makes us have to start from zero again. So I'm not sure if that example is relevant to why someone asked the question, but my go-to is to go back to numbers, because numbers are something that are you can't argue, they just exist, and to kind of present a solution based on your findings. I think it's very important to go into meetings with a plan of what you would propose as a solution, instead of just going into a meeting with your sword out or something, ready to battle it out. I think it's always important to go back to data and then come to the table with, hey, this is what I think we should do to solve this problem.
Perfect, great answer. Ravi, this question is for you. Ravi, I'm a recruiter, and I'm curious from your perspective as a seemingly extremely busy guy, what's the best way to get your attention? Is it through a 5-minute meeting? Is it through gifting you with cupcakes? How do recruiters get time with you?
This person has clearly seen me in person. Cupcakes works. No, actually cupcakes do work for sure. A 5-minute meeting is a really good idea. You know, just getting some time on the calendar is probably the best thing to do. You know, maybe sometimes ad hoc meetings work well, but I would say, you know, as a rule of thumb, just getting five, maybe 10 minutes on the calendar. You know, piggybacking off Ariana's answer to the previous question, coming to that meeting prepared with numbers as well, and with a solution, as opposed to just, hey, this is the problem, and you know, having your sword ready for a fight, so to speak. Coming prepared with a solution, being very succinct in that meeting, I think would be the best thing to do, and bring a cupcake with you as well. That works.
Okay, great. This one's for Ariana. We're kind of going back and forth. Ariana, you categorize the roadblocks into 4 major categories. If you had to choose just one category to fix and solve right away, what would you choose?
Ooh, great question. I love this question. So I think the job profile category is what sets the stage, and without it, you can't really effectively do everything else. So if you are tasked with opening a role with a hiring manager, I think the most important thing is to come up with what a successful hire looks like, maybe outline their 30, 60, 90-day goals, which is something we do here at Greenhouse, as well as their longer term goals. Like, what do you want this person to look like if they're a rock star a year out from now? And then from there, come up with the scorecard. So the scorecard is really kind of the bread and butter of Greenhouse, in the sense that it is the list of, like I said, knowledge, skills, and abilities that someone needs in order to do the job. So without that scorecard, you can't really build an effective interviewing process, because then you don't know exactly what you're interviewing for, right? So to me, the kickoff meeting, that sort of stage, is very much the most important stage to me. And if you do that well, then things tend to fall in place. If that's done kind of half-heartedly or not very thoroughly, then you're going to eventually end up paying for it later down the line, when you can't tie back why you want to hire someone based on your scorecard. So that would be my answer.
Fantastic. Ravi, as a hiring manager, do you have any favorite questions you like to use in interviews to determine if the person is a good culture fit?
That is a very, very good question. I would say, okay, in short, the answer is no. I don't have any favored questions that I like to ask, but what I would say is the cultural fit is incredibly important. Particularly here at Glassdoor, we are, very clear on our values as a company, and they're values that we live and breathe, and it comes right from the top. So from a cultural perspective, it's imperative that any potential candidate that is thinking about joining Glassdoor understands the culture of our organization. We're a hard-working culture, high performance, and it's a culture where a culture of recognition as well, right? A scrappy culture, particularly here in Europe. So if you're not, I would say, if you don't subscribe to that, it probably wouldn't make sense for you to to be in the process, and that's something that I feel is incredibly important for me to communicate during the process. But to answer the question, there isn't any one question that I favor to ask during the process. But I think from a cultural perspective overall, it's incredibly important to me personally as a hiring manager.
Perfect. I'll ask the same to Ariana, kind of just as someone that recruits for a fairly technical field. Do you have any questions that you use that aren't as job related, but do get across if the person would fit in at Greenhouse?
That's a great question. And yes, there are actually a few questions I ask everyone I interview, regardless of whether they're, in a technical, coming in from a technical standpoint, or, in sales or marketing or finance. One of the questions that I really like is more for me, actually. So at the end of the interview, I will always ask the candidate, after we've had a really good chat, is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you think is important for me to know about you? So that question is basically prompting the candidate or giving them an opportunity to talk about anything that I haven't asked them about. Maybe they're really proud of a project that they did. Maybe they want to talk a little bit about what they're like outside of work, or what sort of work-life balance they're expecting. So that is a question where I learn really, really interesting things about people, because it in a way kind of puts the candidate on the spot, but it also prompts them to, share with me what kind of comes first and foremost into their minds. Another thing that we are really big about here at Greenhouse is, I know this is like a really big topic, but is actually diversity. So, one of our cultural values, and we have 6 of them here at Greenhouse, is to be open-minded and inclusive. So we like to proactively ask people about, teams that they've worked on that, where they experience some sort of diversity. And we always tell candidates, diversity can be defined however it makes sense for them. And we ask them about, how has this diversity been contributed to the success of your group, or how has it been challenging in a way, to see how, they describe their experience and see how, open-minded and inclusive that they are when it comes to diversity. So I know that's a big topic, but that is something that we are proactively asking people, just to kind of test the waters and see how people like to respond.
Great. Let's see. Ariana, this is another one for you. You mentioned as one of the solutions to one of the roadblocks that it's important to woo candidates. How do you do that at Greenhouse, and just in your experience, especially if you don't have a lot of budget?
Great question. Working at a startup, you'll always kind of encounter budget as a roadblock. So what I mean by wooing candidates is really focusing on what they want to hear from you, or what they might want to learn from you about an opportunity, rather than just kind of trying to tell them as much as possible. So even when I'm proactively sourcing, let's say engineers, just because they're such in high demand, I will try to keep my messages very brief, but also extremely personalized, so they know that I'm not, another recruiter blasting them with a general email and auto-populating their name in the name field, right? So I will do my homework in terms of learning about this person as much as I can. Do they have any interesting hobbies that potentially I might share with them that I can talk about? Or are they part of any groups that, other people at Greenhouse are a part of and can speak to? Or are they currently working at a company where, we've had someone at Greenhouse work at in the past? So personalization goes such a long way. And I think whenever people understand that you went out of your way and took the time to address them, to kind of study their background, and to really get an understanding of, whether they're a good fit for your role, they will appreciate that effort. Beyond prospecting, once a candidate is on the phone with you or coming to your office and engaging with the team in person, I think it's very, very important to think about what can you do as a recruiter from a candidate experience perspective, so that they walk out of your office being like, wow, that was an awesome team. It was an awesome interview experience, and I definitely would want to work there. So, there are basic things like, offering them beverages or snacks, or showing them where the bathroom is, giving them an office tour, or even, before they come to your office, setting them up for success by providing them the information that they need because they're coming to your office. So let's say you send a little clip of a Google map of where your office is located, or you tell them, hey, there's a Starbucks right across the street if you want to grab a coffee in case you arrive early, things like that. So I would just put yourself in the candidate's shoes as much as possible and think, if I was currently happy with my job and someone reached out to me, in what way would they need to sell me on the opportunity in order for me to be interested?
Amazing. We have another question here. For companies that aren't in the HR recruiting space, What are your recommendations on educating the company on why recruiting is so important?
Is this question for the both of us?
This is for you, Ariana, sorry.
Okay, cool. That's a great question. So for companies that are not in the HR space, what can you do to educate the company in terms of the importance of recruiting, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Great question again. So previously to Greenhouse, I was at a company that was not in the HR space. It was in the fintech space. And, Ravi spoke to this a bit, but I can't stress the importance of the importance of getting the buy-in from your leadership team. The leadership team needs to understand the importance of recruiting, and generally people up at top are the ones who have kind of the high-level strategy of growing the company, and they understand, if we need to hit XYZ goals, we need to hire XYZ person or people. So if you can get kind of the leadership at the top bought into your process, then behavior usually trickles down. Like, for example, if a hiring manager stresses the importance of providing referrals or proactively sourcing to their team is much more likely to do it rather than if a recruiter goes up to them and asks them for that. So as much as possible, I would try to get the leadership involved. If the leadership feels inaccessible to you, or if you feel like you're in a position where you can't quite leverage that sort of relationship because it feels like too much of a top-down distance, I would definitely get your manager on board, or even your manager's manager. So sometimes I'll go to my manager's manager, who's a director of recruiting, whenever we're working on a really big initiative, so that she can communicate to other directors, peer-to-peer, all the important recruiting initiatives that we're doing. So I think it's a matter of getting buy-in by leveraging all the relationships that are accessible to you and kind of encouraging those relationships to leverage their peer-level relationships.
Fantastic. All right, it looks like that is going to take us to time today. So thank you so much to both Ariana and Ravi. Amazing information today. As I previously mentioned, we will be sharing the materials from today within the next 24 hours or so. We hope to see you all on another upcoming webinar, and thanks again to everyone for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Shay. Thanks, Ariana. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.